This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming this afternoon. For those of you not in my class, some of you here, I'm Lori Blank. I'm the director of the International Humanitarian Law Clinic here at Emory, and I'm very happy to welcome you to our event this afternoon. In March of 2012, an Army Staff Sergeant, Robert Bales, left his base late one night and went into 2 villages in Afghanistan and killed 16 civilians. We're going to hear today about the prosecution of Staff Sergeant Bales from the military justice perspective, and learn a lot also about the cultural implications and all the cultural challenges involved in prosecuting a case during wartime that occurred 10,000 miles away in Afghanistan. So we have here with us today to talk to us about this case Lieutenant Colonel J. Morse, who currently serves as Chief of the Trial Counsel Assistance Program in the U.S. Army, which is at Fort Belvoir in Virginia, and was the lead prosecutor in the case of U.S. v. Staff Sergeant Bales. And also Morwari Zafar, who is an Afghanistan subject matter expert at the Defense Intelligence Agency Center for Language, Regional Expertise, and Culture. And she has served as an expert witness on Afghan cultural norms in U.S. military courts-martial. So I'm very happy to welcome them here today to talk with us. We're going to hear mostly about this prosecution and the military justice system. And then after we have a chance to hear from them and take some Q&A from the audience, Lieutenant Colonel Morse will also talk to us a bit about some of the issues that are currently swirling around in Congress regarding the system for dealing with sexual assault crimes in the military. As part of his job at the Trial Counsel Assistance Program, he supervises the 23 special victims prosecutors stationed worldwide in the U.S. Army. So what we're going to do is hear that as the second section of the event. So questions regarding that, just hold them till we have a chance to hear some opening remarks from Lieutenant Colonel Morse on that subject after we hear about the Bales case. So please join me in welcoming our guests here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks first. I gotta remember to talk. I have hereditary bad hearing. My grandfather, he also had jet black hair until the day he died, so I'm okay with a little bit of bad hearing. But I speak loudly. So one, thank you for having me. As I was telling Professor Blank earlier, this has been a very cathartic process for me to be able to talk about what we did over about an 18-month, a little bit less than an 18-month period. This is a fact-intensive case, so I talk very quickly. But the good news is at the end, I'll answer any question you guys have to the best of my ability. So first, this ended up in a guilty plea. So much of what I talk about is part of the record. There may be some things that I skip over, and that's because the appellate process is still ongoing. Any opinions are mine alone, despite the fact that I got U.S. Army all over me. So let's get started. So what you're looking at right now is the country of Afghanistan. Of course, it's bordered to the west by Iran and to the south and to the east by Pakistan. For our purposes, we're really focused on the province of Kandahar and narrow it down even further, the district of Panjwai. It's about 20 miles west of Kandahar city. We're actually specifically going to focus on 2 villages or 3 villages in that district of Panjwai. The far west portion is called the Horn of Panjwai. If you look at it on a map, it comes to a point. Panjwai is, the people who live here are almost exclusively farmers, subsistence farmers, usually grapes and wheat. They are largely illiterate. They are almost exclusively Pashtun. Of course, deeply religious, deeply traditional, and very cultural. The villages in these three, the homes in these 3 villages look much like what you see in front of you. They're mud and earth compounds. Almost all of them are oriented to the north and south, as you see, windowless, no electricity, no plumbing. They might have some doors. individual rooms, but probably not. Oftentimes they just have a covering that goes across the door. No paved roads. I think there's one that's north of the two villages. For our purpose, we're really going to focus on just a few villages. First, up in the northeast corner, you see something called FOB Zangabad. A FOB is a forward operating base. In March of 2012, there was an infantry battalion here. So probably somewhere less than 1,000 soldiers. That's a mix of U.S. soldiers and Afghan National Army soldiers as well. Important for us, FOB Zangabad had a medical treatment facility that could do really emergency life-saving measures. Anything greater than that, they would have to send them to Kandahar Airfield. It also had an aerostat balloon. It looks basically like the mini blimp that you might see televising a football game. Underneath that balloon was a camera called a PGIS, a persistent ground surveillance system, and we'll come back to that. The villages that we're going to focus on are one in the center here is Balambai. VSP stands for Village Stability Platform. Village Stability Platform is really just a base where American soldiers or coalition soldiers were based in order to complete their missions. Their mission here in March of 2012 was an effort to, an attempt to give the villagers something other than the Taliban, something other than the insurgency to come to. So you can see the VSP Balambai. The gray area is actually specifically the base. It's surrounded by anywhere from 8 to 10 foot mud and brick walls. I want to focus a few things on this aerial shot. One, this gap in the wall right here, that's the only entry and exit off of VSP Balambai. There is a wooden gate, a 2x4, with one strand of concertina wrapped around it. This is how it looked in March of 2012. Again, the only entry and exit off of VSP Balambai. In this southeastern corner, you can see just a very small gray square. That was a tower. The picture I took, so this is about 3 weeks after the crime occurred. So what you're looking at is much what Panjwai looked like at the time. This is actually a view from the tower. In the foreground is the living area of the Afghan National Army soldiers. On the base at the time, it was about half Afghan soldiers and about half U.S. soldiers. Of those U.S. soldiers, about half of them were Special Forces soldiers. The other half were U.S. Army infantrymen. This is looking off to the west. This is the same view looking off to the south and to the west. If you can see, barely, there's a group of soldiers right here. This is the view from the tower. This is the view that the Afghan soldier on duty would have had when Sergeant Bales was walking on and off the base. Those soldiers are actually standing right outside the gate. They're standing on a north or east-west running road. The soldiers called it No Name Road. Along this tree line off in the distance is a second road called Charlottetown. I'll show you an overhead view of that in just a moment. The building right here off the south, outside the south gate, one half of it's a madrasa or a school. The other half is a clinic. Both of them were vacant for a long period of time before March of 2012, and as far as I know, they're vacant even today. This last picture is actually taken from the center of the VSP, or the Village Stability Platform, on top of the American Operations Center, where they were they were based. This is a view looking to the northwest. These are our restrooms. If you guys can see this right here in the corner, that's actually an open tube that the soldiers would urinate into if they needed. So pretty austere living conditions. These are where the soldiers live. These cans are where the soldiers live. They're exactly what they look like. They're mill vans that are converted to living areas. This red one you can barely see, that was the living compound of Staff Sergeant Robert Bales. So, as I said, they conducted their mission from VSP Balambai. Really, they focused on the two villages of Ali Kozai and Najibien. Ali Kozai is about 600 meters to the north, Najibien about 800 meters to the south. Though this was a kinetic area, meaning it was dangerous, Panjwai is the historical home of the Taliban. Though it was dangerous, Ali Kozai was less dangerous. They were probably neutral, if not friendly. The village of Najibien to the south was probably neutral, if maybe a little bit hostile. In actuality, if the American forces or coalition forces were going to take fire when they left VSP Balambai, they were going to take it from a town called Garandai, further south and east and off the map. We're going to narrow our focus even more for our purposes. So in the village of Ali Kozai, there's two homes right there. The home on the left belongs to the gentleman on the left. His name is Haji Saeed Jan. The gentleman on the right is named Haji Mohammed Naeem. Haji Saeed Jan and his family lived in this compound. Haji Mohammed Naeem was an elder and a landowner in the village. He was wealthy by their standards. Haji Saeed Jan, his neighbor, was not. In one of my conversations with Haji Saeed Jan, the gentleman on the left, I was asking about his relationship with his neighbor, Haji Muhammad Naim, thinking that these two had grown up together, known each other for a very long time. The translator described him as his slave. And I literally said, "Can you say that again?" He said, "Yeah, he's his slave." I don't know if there was not the proper word for translation, because as I came to know them, he clearly was not a slave. What I do think he was probably some sort of a tenant farmer that relied solely on the ability to farm on Haji Naim's property in order to make a living for his family. I would need a whole separate hour and a whole separate PowerPoint slide and a wire diagram to show you the familial relationships between these two. Haji Naim had 16 kids, on the 13 of which lived in this compound with him, these two areas right here. On the right side of this compound was another gentleman named Nazar Aka, Nazar Mohammed, or Nazar Aka, Aka meaning uncle. Nazar Aka was the brother of Haji Saeed Jan. Nazar Aka had a wife and 4 children who lived on this side of the compound. In the southern village of Najibien, first in the northeast corner, you'll see a small compound that belonged to a gentleman named Muhammad Daoud. The picture you see in front of you is actually his brother, a gentleman named Mullah Baran. The kids you see are a mix of Mullah Baran's own children and the children of his brother, who is now dead. And lastly, in the southwestern corner of the town of Najibien is the home of Haji Muhammad Wazir. That's Haji Wazir. He was in a town called Spin Boldak at the time of the crime, so he was away from his home. His youngest son was with him. His name is Habib Shah. He's probably about 6 years old. It was a good thing Habib Shah was with him in Spin Boldak, because 10 of Haji Wazir's family members were murdered this night. Basically his entire family except for Habib Shah. Of the 11, only his mother was not burned after Sergeant Bales murdered him. So, early morning hours on the 11th of March, Sergeant Bales left VSP Bombay out the southwestern or southern entrance. He walked those approximately 600 meters north to the village of Ali Kozai. He first entered the home of Haji Saeed Jan. He was immediately confronted by Haji Saeed Jan's wife, an elderly woman named Nick Marga, a grandmother. She physically wrestled with Sergeant Bales long enough to allow her family to escape to the compound to the west. Very complex set of facts that happened over this 4 hours that we're not going to go all the way into. What happened in the village of Ali Kozai is that Sergeant Bales murdered 4. The first person he murdered was actually an elderly gentleman named Kudi Dad. He was asleep when Sergeant Bales shot him. The second person that Sergeant Bales murdered was that elderly man, Nazar Aka. The third person he murdered was Nazar Aka's daughter, about a 3-year-old girl who was standing next to Nazar Aka, holding her father when he shot her in the head. The fourth person that he murdered was Nick Marga, that grandmother that initially wrestled with him in the compound. Sergeant Bales didn't stop firing until he ran low on ammunition. There were 6 folks who were also injured in the village of Ali Kozai. Sergeant Bales leaves the compound once he's low on ammunition. He returns back using the exact same route back to VSP Belambay. No one saw Sergeant Bales walk off VSP Belambay. When he walked back on, there was an Afghan soldier named Nematullah, who was on guard duty. Nematullah speaks only Dari. He speaks neither English nor Pashto. He calls out in Dari for Sergeant Bales to stop. Sergeant Bales answers Sengai in Pashto, means basically, how you doing? One of the few words that Sergeant Bales knew. He continued on to his room. Nematullah reported it to his boss. His boss, another Afghan soldier, didn't think it was any big deal. So they didn't report anything. When Sergeant Bales goes to his room, he reloads. He also enters the room of one of his fellow soldiers, another sergeant. Tells him where he's been. What he says is, I just came back from Ali Kozai. I was killing military-aged males. Sergeant Bales, in fact, knew he had been killing women and children. He took another weapon from this other soldier's room. On the way back out, he said, hey, I'm leaving again. I'm going to the southern town of Najibien, going back out to do the same thing. That soldier said, hey, I have guard duty. Like, get out of my room, basically. I'm trying to sleep. I got guard duty. Sergeant Bales says, that's good, because I'll be back at 5. And he said, take care of my children. The other soldier said, take care of your own damn kids. Sergeant Bales said, no, really, take care of my children. This other soldier who wanted to go back to sleep because he had guard duty said, fine, I'll take care of your kids. With that, Sergeant Bales walks back out VSP Belambay. There's a different Afghan guard on duty at this time, a soldier named Tash Ali. Tash Ali also calls out in Dari to stop. Sergeant Bales responds back, Sengai, how are you doing? Keeps walking. Tash Ali tells his boss, the same boss who was told by Nematullah earlier. He then puts 2 and 2 together. They wake up Captain Dan Fields, who was the Special Forces commander at the time, senior officer on the base. He does 2 things. He immediately orders 100% accountability. Everyone is accounted for except for Sergeant Bales. The second thing he does is call that FOB Zangabad, Forward Operating Base Zangabad, in the northeast corner of the first picture I showed you. FOB Zangabad, again, has that camera. He lets them know that I'm missing a soldier. He doesn't know what he has at this point, whether the soldier was sleepwalking, he'd been abducted, really has no idea. Sergeant Bales walks the approximately 800 meters south to Muhammad Dawood's house, executes Muhammad Dawood in front of his wife and 7 of his children. He then walks about the 200 to 300 meters west to Muhammad Wazir's house, Haji Muhammad Wazir's house. He murders 11 people. He lights 10 of them on fire. The last person he murdered was Haji Wazir's mother, an elderly woman named Shatrina. Sergeant Bales shoots her twice. She doesn't die. He then finishes her off by literally stomping her head in. Sergeant Bales then, after lighting them on fire, he takes a blanket from the doorway, because once Sergeant Bales stepped outside, he realized that the wind was blowing and he didn't want to be cold outside. Sergeant Bales starts his walk back from Najibien, back towards VSP Balambai. About the same time, Captain Fields gets a call back from FOB Zangabad, that camera operator he had called and said, hey, look for my guy. They call back about an hour later and say, I think we found him. So what you're watching is literally the first time that they saw Sergeant Bales. He's about a third of the way back from Najibien all the way back to FOB Zangabad. He's wearing a Kevlar or a helmet. He has a night vision goggle device attached to it. He's carrying a 9mm H&K Heckler & Koch sidearm. He's carrying an M4 rifle that fires a 5.56mm round, and he's carrying a pistol that fires a 40mm grenade. He's wearing that cape I talked to you about. Sergeant Bales is laying down in the middle of that field because soldiers at VSP Balambai are firing off illumination rounds and parachute flares. So Sergeant Bales essentially lies still until that light dissipates and he's able to get up and continue his walk back to VSP Balambai. This video is important for a couple reasons. One is pretty irrefutable evidence that there's one person off the base and there's one person involved in this murder. Very important for us later on. Many of the families thought there was upwards of 40 people, a platoon involved in this crime. The second one, both important to us for if this were to be a contested trial, Sergeant Bales pled guilty in order to take a possible sentence of death off the table. Second thing, whether this is a merits case or case on sentencing, is to show that this is not a soldier who's affected by drugs or alcohol or operating in a rage or steroids or whatever it is. What you see Sergeant Bales just do is look through his night vision goggles at the ground in front of him for signs of disturbed earth or anything else to indicate that there might be a mine planted right there. Sergeant Bales, instead of walking through that choke point, which is more dangerous, he actually climbs over the top of the wall. This is a soldier who looks like he's in possession of all his physical and mental faculties. Sergeant Bales continues his walk home. The camera stays with him for about 15 minutes. What you're going to see here is Sergeant Bales all right, that looks better. Sergeant Bales continues on that north-south road, Charlottetown Road. He makes a right turn onto East-West Road. You can see him, or No Name Road. You see him up there on the north or upper right corner of your screen. At the bottom here, at this point, Captain Fields had that call back. He realizes that Sergeant Bales is coming in on his own. He had prepared a search party to go out for Sergeant Bales. Tells him to come back. What he does tell 2 of his soldiers is to stand out front and wait for Sergeant Bales. There are 2 other sergeants, non-special forces, 2 other normal infantry sergeants who know Sergeant Bales. One of them is the soldier that Sergeant Bales stopped and talked to in between his first and second time off the base. So that soldier where he said, I've been Ali Kozai, I'm going back out to Najibien to kill more people, I'll be back at 5, take care of my kids. Sergeant Bales takes up a run once he hears his friends calling his name. They're also flashing infrared light on their night vision goggles. So Sergeant Bales, we argued Sergeant Bales was coming home. He believed he was coming home to his friends who were essentially going to walk him back on the base. The third person you see here is a Special Forces soldier who was supposed to lead the initial patrol. Sergeant Bales stops running once he realizes that his friends have their weapons pointed at him or telling him to stop and drop his weapons to put them on the ground. The very first thing Sergeant Bales says is, "Are you fucking kidding me?" The second thing Sergeant Bales says is, "Mac, did you rat me out?" Mac is the sergeant that Sergeant Bales spoke to in between his first and second trips off the base. Sergeant Bales walks into the operations center and sits down across from Captain Dan Fields, who says something along the lines of, "What the fuck is going on?" Sergeant Bales says, "I would like to tell you, but I don't want you to have to testify against me later." Over about the next 8 hours, Sergeant Bales makes many statements to many people, none of which were outright confessions, many of which were admissions that allowed us, I believe, to essentially motivate Sergeant Bales to plead guilty and move this case along quickly. So I could talk about this for hours, for days really. I want us to talk about 3 things here today. One is the investigation and how we conducted it. The second is my relations or our interaction as a prosecution team with the victims and the witnesses. And last is just some trial preparation. So let's talk investigation first. We weren't able to visit the crime scene until the 2nd of April, so approximately 3 weeks after Sergeant Bales committed the murders. Afghan CID were able to get out there the next morning. That's one of the, CID stands for Criminal Investigative Division. This is an Afghan detective. They got out there the next morning under some pretty adverse conditions themselves. They actually came under fire when they went to that second village in the south of Najibien where one Afghan soldier was killed. They did the best they could. We couldn't get out there for about 3 weeks because of the security situation. When we did finally make it out there, none of the prosecution went. All our investigators went, 5 of them. They processed 4 separate crime scenes, so 4 separate homes, 2 separate villages. Each room probably had 5 to, or each house had 5 to 8 rooms. So in one day, these guys were forced to just basically haul through all 4 of these compounds and do the best they could. I bring this up to show you some of the investigative challenges. You're looking at the exact same room. This is the 3rd house that Sergeant Bales visited on that night where he executed Muhammad Dawood in front of his family. This is how it looked on the 12th of March. This is how it looked on the 2nd of April. We didn't have access to any of that evidence that's in there. You can imagine there's a lot of stuff there that we would have liked to have had. This is another before and after. This picture on the left was taken on the 12th of March. The picture on the right was taken on the 2nd of April. Again, it's the exact same room. I want you to focus on a couple things. One is, this is literally hours after Sergeant Bales murdered 11 and lit 10 of those people on fire. You can see their ashes still, what's left of their ashes is still on the floor. The family cleaned everything out of this room before the investigators showed up. There used to be a stove right here. So they literally came in, took all of their belongings out, they put it in a separate room, mud and bricked the room over, and didn't come back and get it until later on. In the lower left-hand corner, lower left wall of both these pictures, you can see some gray, lighter gray spots. This is where the family literally scraped their family members off the wall. So hair, blood, in some instances brain matter, to ensure that as much of their family members were buried with them. They scraped their body off the wall, they scraped their blood off the wall, buried them in the clothes that they were wearing at the time that Sergeant Bales murdered them and lit them on fire. Another important, another difficulty in the investigation is come back to that one. This same room, the first people to actually show up and see the victims were some elderly women from the village. They weren't allowed to go in. Culturally, they weren't allowed to go in until an elderly or a male was present. The first male who showed up was a gentleman named Kamaluddin, who's the cousin of Haji Wazir. That was his aunt, who Sergeant Bales murdered. Kamaluddin shows up to see a group of people standing outside of the home. As soon as he walks in, he sees that there are women and children. The women are not decent. Their clothes have been burned off. Some of them are partially naked. Kamaluddin then goes back out of the room, gets women from the village to go in, properly cover them. Only then does he go in and separate the women and the men from one another and pull them out of the compound. So another difficulty in investigating the case. This last one, these are both taken by Afghan criminal investigators. This is in the second home Sergeant Bales visited that night, that of Haji Mohammed Naeem's. This is the exact same spot. I bring this up because I have no idea what placard 11 is compared to what placard 12 is. They're the same blood spot. The The entire Afghan detective file was a page and a half. Again, they did the best. They did really a good job given their education level in forensics and given the amount of time that they had. But that's one indicator. You also see a pile of brass. This is expended 5.56 millimeter and 9 millimeter rounds. They obviously weren't found in front of that pile of blood. We have no idea where they were found. They might not have been from this room. They might have been from a different compound. They might have been from a different village completely. We have a video where the Afghan soldiers that first showed up to help were on security while they helped develop the crime scene, actually sifting through the ashes. Afghan soldiers frequently in firefights, when they're in gunfights with the bad guys, will stop and pick up their ammunition because that expended brass is valuable. They'll pick it up and put it in their pockets. So who knows how much of the evidence from this case was lost due to that. We were able to get some evidence from not only from Sergeant Bales, who was literally filthy with blood, but also from the Afghans as well. This is Sergeant Bales' pants. This is the shirt he was wearing. We were able to match up DNA samples from scrapings on the wall and also some of the living family members of the deceased. We were able to take buccal swabs or cheek swabs and hair clippings and able to match them up and develop, I think, 9 profiles. We were also able to get test Sergeant Bales' weapons. Forensics came back that said that they couldn't tell us specifically how close or how far away Sergeant Bales was when he fired his rounds, but they told us 2 very important things that we were able to argue. 1, put into the stipulation of fact, and 2, be able to argue at sentencing. The first is in that northern village where we had living victims. We were able to say that Sergeant Bales was never further away than 5 feet from the victims he was firing. The second we were able to argue is that this is the barrel of his 9 millimeter. That's the slide. When you fire a 9 millimeter or double action, when you pull the trigger, the slide or the top of the weapon retracts. That expended round will fly out, a spring will cause a new round to come up, and then the slide will slide back forward again, loading that second round. So that's what allows someone to just fire repeatedly. You can see blood and other residue inside the slide, meaning that when that slide was back, it was pressed up against human flesh. So Sergeant Bales is literally doing contact shots where he's putting his weapon to people's heads. The second thing I want to talk about is our interaction with the victims and the witnesses. Ms. Zafar is going to talk a lot more about the difficulty in talking with women and children, and frequently with eyewitnesses in general, for a lot of reasons. Again, there were living victims in Ali Kozai. We were able to actually treat them both at the American hospital at Fabzangabad and in the American hospital at Kandahar Airfield. Important because our investigators were able to go in and talk to them, to include these 3 gentlemen. This is Siddiqullah. He's about 12 years old. He was shot through the ear. The bullet skirted the back of his head, fracturing his skull, and then exited out the back. The boy in the middle is named Rafiullah. He's probably 15 or 16 years old. He was shot through his right leg, and the bullet still remains in his left leg. The gentleman on the far right you saw earlier, that's Haji Mohammed Naeem. Haji Naeem stepped in front of the room where his entire family was gathered, probably about as big as 2 of these table sections. Upwards of 30 people in that room. Haji Naeem walked out, told Sergeant Bales to stop, and Pashto, Sergeant Bales raised his rifle and shot him twice, once in the face and once in the neck. All 3 of these were consistent and were adamant that there was one person involved. Even if their story may have changed a little bit later on, we'll talk about in a minute. But they were all consistent that one person was involved. Again, important for us. We had video proof, but it was still important for us to be able to persuade these guys that this was not a platoon of American soldiers involved. This is not some sort of a conspiracy. This was one soldier who left the base and committed these horrific acts. So on talking to these guys, if I'm briefing you, or if you guys are investigating a case, anyone who's essentially grown up in the West, you tend to think left and right, left to right. Read left to right. You think linearly. I could put this slide on I'm a little bit of a PowerPoint fanatic. I could put this slide up without narration, and you guys could probably figure out roughly what I'm talking about, right? We could follow that, even to the extent that you could say there were helicopters in the air probably between 3:30 and 4:30, and again between 06 and 08. Well, talking to the witnesses, I realized that they don't think in this linear manner. For them, it's more, everything's focused around a single event. So whether it happened a day or 10 days prior to the crime, whether helicopters were in the air in the middle of the night when Sergeant Bales was committing his crime, or hours later during broad daylight, to them it all supported this central idea or this significant emotional event of this murder. So it was very difficult to persuade them that, not only persuade them that there was one person involved and the helicopters in the air were actually taking your family members to a different hospital to treat them. It was also difficult when you're talking to them to try to get in their mind. So as a prosecutor, all you future trial attorneys, when you're investigating a case, you want to know every single fact, right? Most of which will never see the light of day of the courtroom. But you want to be able to, every witness you call, you want to know that kid, you want to know his own story better than he does. So you want to ask as many questions as possible to help you develop that, theme and theory that you're eventually going to argue in court. That might even start with, hey, tell me about your day. Tell me how it started. Let me know what life is like for you, starting from when you wake up. My experience when talking with folks who grew up in the West is that that's easy. They understand that the crime I'm talking about came 12 hours later, so they say, well, I woke up in the morning and I went to the bathroom and I brushed my teeth, I turned on the TV. For these folks, because everything is centered around this significant emotional event, it is, he came into my house and killed people. What else do you need to know? It doesn't matter what went on at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm telling you what happened at 4 o'clock in the morning. We also had this grand idea of using technology in the courtroom, all the way from PowerPoint to 3D videos recreating the crime scene, to actually a terrain model or a little miniaturized version of all three of the villages. Not only to help us develop the story with the victims, but also to help share that story to a jury or to a judge when it eventually went to trial. That went out the window the first time I talked with ZafarAfghan, an exceptionally gregarious old fellow. I showed him, the first time I talked to him, this picture right here. This is his door. So the room inside of his house, inside of his compound, this is presumably a door he has gone in and out of many times a day over many weeks, over many years of his life. I brought this up in the context of exactly what I was just talking to you about. Tell me what happens behind the doors. Like, tell me about your life. Let me know what. Tell me what life is like for you. He finally picked up the picture I had in front of him and looked at it closely, looked underneath it, and then looked on the ground behind him to see, or behind the picture, to see if there was somehow, in my mind, something projected or something there that was still on the ground. Finally, he said, I don't know what this is, but if this were my house, pointing to the door on the left, this would be Haji Naim's house, pointing to the door on the right. So if you look at an aerial photo, you can kind of see what he was talking about. In his mind, that picture was simply, the closest comparison he could make is that, well, that's how close the two compounds are together. Because in his mind, that makes sense. That supports why I'm even asking him a question, which is Sergeant Bales attacked people in two separate homes. I will counter that a little bit with the experience I had immediately after that with Haji ZafarAfghan. This is a young boy named Kudratullah, who's probably 16 to 18 years old. Really the hero of this story. As soon as Sergeant Bales finished firing, he jumped a wall, grabbed a motorcycle, and drove to his brother's house. They then borrowed a car from a neighbor, were able to come back and pick up the 5 of the 6 injured, and probably save 3 of their lives. Immediately after I finished talking with Haji ZafarAfghan, I took this picture on my tablet. I showed it to Kudratullah, who smiled and then did what? He swiped his finger across the screen. So he knew exactly what he was doing. Whether he'd done that interacting with American soldiers or coalition soldiers, I'm still not sure what that means. Morwari probably does. It's either that software is intuitive and there's some really smart folks at Microsoft, or culture really takes a while. It takes a while for Haji ZafarAfghan to realize that he's looking at a picture of his room and not something else. The last thing I want to talk to you about is trial preparation. So I found out on the 15th of March, I found out that I was going to be the lead prosecutor in the case. Late at night on the 15th of March. Early morning the 17th, I woke up, I wrote in my journal, a journal nerd as well as a PowerPoint nerd, this verbatim. I said, success for me means this. I want a conviction, I want the victim satisfied or at least understanding of the process, and I want no insurmountable mistakes. Not tied to a particular sentence, not tied to a particular timeline, but this meant success for me. So number 1 and number 3 go to, in the military we call it backwards planning. You probably did it here today, you probably do it every day of your life, you probably just don't call it backwards planning. You know you gotta be somewhere at a certain time, so you start working backwards, right? You knew you had to be here at 4:30, you figured out what time you had class, how long it was gonna take you to make whatever pit stops you needed to make, perhaps backing up all the way to you leaving your own home and figuring out how you had to deal with traffic or whatever else it was. So for us, in order to get to conviction and no insurmountable mistakes, one of the early things for that backwards planning was theme and theory, developing a theme and a theory. The theme for our case, that's just really a hook, something that you can use to relate to the panel, something that's going to stick in their brains. Ours was my count is 20. At one point, Sergeant Bales said to some of the folks standing around him, my count is 20. We argued, and it was in the stipulation of fact that Sergeant Bales was actually referring to the number of victims he killed. So I was able to argue at sentencing that he's counting them as he's shooting them. So my count is 20 was the theme. The theory was something else. But one of our theories is that Sergeant Bales was not, let me start this one over. One of our theories is that Sergeant Bales really was just a bad guy. This is not someone who was affected by PTSD or alcohol or steroids or whatever else it was. But Sergeant Bales was on his 4th deployment. So early on we realized that we were going to have to find something that was going to overcome any sympathy that our jury might have had for a soldier who is on his 4th deployment. One of those things that allows you to relate to your panel was, in this case, was the killing of children. That's something that transcends, hopefully, cultures and borders and armies and everything else. You don't shoot kids. Sergeant Bales has 2 children. We anticipated that they would bring that up in an attempt to get some sympathy from the jury, whether this was a case on the merits or a case that was purely for sentencing. So I asked the jury, please consider Sergeant Bales' 2 children when you come to a sentence. But also consider the 40 children who were affected by Sergeant Bales. So we played this slide at trial with no commentary. What you're looking at is literally the 40 children who were affected by Sergeant Bales' actions. So they were either murdered, injured by Sergeant Bales, witness to a murder or Sergeant Bales shooting someone, lost a parent or lost a grandparent. So this played silently at trial, I think, was pretty powerful and was able to give you that sort of, you as the prosecutor, that extra connection with the panel to make sure that they understand this is about the victims, not about the accused or the defendant. Again, culturally, and Ms. Zafar will talk about it a little bit more. It wasn't easy for us to get the names of all the children, particularly some of the young girls who are either in adulthood or nearing adulthood. So the other concern, the other connection we wanted to make sure we had with the panel, or the other potential obstacle that we wanted to make sure we defused, was this this thing Sergeant Bales said to his friend before he left back out the second time, which was, take care of my kids. If you hear that, whether you're a prosecutor or defense attorney, what are you thinking? What's the potential issue with take care of my kids? It says to me that maybe this was a suicide mission, right? Maybe this is a guy who's like, I'm going out and I'm not coming back. So when I don't come back, I want to make sure somebody's going to take care of my kids. We anticipated the defense might argue something like that. But words have meaning, both from who's delivering them and who the recipient is. So when the civilian counsel were talking to them, it was, this is a suicide mission. What we heard was Sergeant Bales was just going on a mission, just a normal mission. Because the order he gave those statements match up with something called a GATWA. So this is an abbreviation that's infantry soldiers, almost exclusively infantry soldiers will use when they need to quickly convey some information. So they'll use it in sort of their normal day-to-day activities, particularly when they are in Afghanistan or otherwise deployed. A GATWA stands for where you're going, others you're taking with you, time you'll be gone, what to do if you don't come back, and actions to take if I'm hit. You don't have to say GATWA every time. You just say those 5 sentences in that particular order. If one is not necessary, you omit it and you skip on to the next one. So where we anticipated the civilian counsel would say, this is a guy going on a suicide mission. He's telling someone to take care of his kids in an effort to get sympathy, either for on the merits or for sentencing. We just heard mission. Because Sergeant Bales said, I'm going to Najibien. I'm going alone. I'll be back at 5. He came back at 4:45, by the way. And if I don't come back, take care of my kids. So half of our jury, half of our panel were infantry soldiers. So we're not allowed to talk to our juries. We're not allowed to talk to our panels because they are sitting panels. They exist for anywhere from 6 to 12 months. So I don't know if this was effective. But I will tell you that my opinion is that this really refuted, put to bed any notion that Sergeant Bales was anything other than a murderer. So the last thing I want to talk about is that middle goal, which was victim satisfied, or at least understanding of the process. In hindsight, I realize how ridiculously ambitious, grandiose, unreasonable it was for me to think that you could have the victims be satisfied. And to me, this does transcend culture. They very much wanted the death penalty, but I wonder how many how many Americans, had they been in that position, would have wanted the same thing. So to suggest that the victims would be satisfied with the ultimate conclusion, which was a guilty plea and a life without imprisonment, I think is a little bit ridiculous, certainly in hindsight. But victims' understanding of our process was very important to me, and was a struggle throughout the entire process, to be honest. Early on, I recognized that what we were going to need was someone who could speak both languages, literally both languages, and also figuratively, someone who could walk both in Western culture and someone who could walk in Afghan culture as well. Someone who would have sympathy and compassion for the children and understand how important it was for us to have these victims here and to be able to testify, and also someone who could be deferential to those heads of household, but also put her foot down, and when she needed to, say, enough, get in line. So actually, I asked Ms. Zafar, I described that exact person. She referred us to a woman named Jamila Atmar, who was in Afghanistan at the time. That's her hiding right there. What I didn't anticipate, what I I don't think was prepared for, was how close many of us became to most of the victims, frankly. We interacted with them multiple times in Afghanistan, and again on 2 separate visits, each about 10 days or so, to Fort Lewis. Largely it was due to these victim witness liaisons that were allowed us to really get close to some of these guys. Because we have time. The 2 young kids up here in the corner, the one on the left is a young girl named Zardana. She's about 9 years old. She was shot in the top of her head, and the round exited out the back. The first time I saw her, she was in a vegetative state. We thought she would be dead by the time we landed in Kandahar. Someone brilliant at Kandahar Airfield said, she's in an American hospital. She's not dying when she's here. We're not pulling the plug. They left the plug in. Zardana today is alive and well. She has some physical disabilities, but as far as we can tell, no cognitive disabilities whatsoever. The girl on the right name is Robina. She was injured, just a grazing shot across her knee. Her little sister, Golalai, was the small child who was murdered by Sergeant Bales, as was her father, ZafarAfghan. Haji Naim, of course, we've talked about multiple times. The upper right-hand corner is Rafiullah and Siddiqullah. Both of those boys were injured. Khan is about a 9-year-old boy who saw Sergeant Bales execute his father in front of him. Everybody looks happy here because this is the after-sentence shot. The before-sentence shot, a lot of tension in the room. I think that's probably a good...
Thank you.
Before I begin this section, I just actually want to address what Colonel Morse was saying about Siddiqullah's aptitude in terms of sliding his finger across the iPad, was it? You would be surprised what you could find on the black market in Kandahar. They find, extra strength Viagra, which to my knowledge, I don't even think you can find in the US, but amazing what you could do with a bit of bottles and labeling. But so I'm pretty sure they've probably come across these things over there at some point. To touch on what Colonel Morse was saying, we're going to look at it from a cultural lens, focusing mostly on accountability and the pursuit and perceptions of justice in Afghanistan. What I do want to preface before I start this is that this is my views. It's not representative of the Defense Intelligence Agency or the Center for Language, Region, Expertise, and Culture within the DIAC. So, to understand individual accountability in Afghanistan, we have to think about the way that people identify themselves. So an individual's identity, their sense of self, their values and their actions are reflected by, and they reflect, in turn, largely their family, but also their community, their tribe. So wherever they come from is very important to who they are, in essence, and what they do. This largely means that individual accountability, there's nothing really individual about it. everything is much more collective. So there's a shared sense of responsibility. There's a shared sense of narratives that emerged. Nothing is necessarily individual. This relates to the case in two ways. One is the way truth is shaped and perceived. So in a society like this, individuals are beholden to their families or to their communities, their tribes, whatever, if they are tribal. But it means that it's very much bound by honor and tradition. So you don't necessarily want to go against what the village elders, when they're considered to be the repositories of honor in these communities, what they hold to be true. So in a case like this, when you had the belief that there was a platoon of American soldiers that had acted together versus Sergeant Bales murdering people alone, that may have been a truth that was perpetuated by, say, a group of village elders or tribal elders, perhaps, that had come up with this idea, and people, even if they had witnessed the opposite, did not necessarily want to come forward and refute that statement because it would be considered disrespectful and dishonorable. The other part was in the perception of responsibility. If somebody had done that within the tribal community that the victims in Panjwai live in, if somebody had done that, people would think that their family was responsible for their actions, that their family, their education, their background, something should have prevented them from acting in that way. So for Sergeant Bales, there's no way that he could have acted alone to them. Right? What he did, the U.S. Army basically shared in that responsibility, so they had to be held responsible. Hence this belief that there was, multiple shooters, or if not multiple shooters, that even the prosecution team was in some way implicated by trying, as they saw it, assisting him. Like, why are you helping him? We know what should happen. He should get a death sentence for what he has done. The other aspect of accountability is it's religion, the supernatural. So psychologists term magical thinking. Right? It's the fact that, or the belief that your circumstances are controlled by these unseen external tertiary factors. And this is a big part of the communities in Afghanistan, whether they're Pashtun, as the ones in Panjwai were, or not. But it is the belief that one, through Islam, that God dictates your will. But two, that there are these mystical forces that can be used to remove you from a certain action. Right? So somebody commits murder, it's not necessarily that they did it or they willed it, but that their actions were willed by God or perhaps by demons or angels or whatever other mystical force. But this whole thing ties into, like I said, the perception of individual perceptions, but also honor, and that's basically social currency in those regions. So how respectful you seem, or how much you show Islamic values, or demonstrate your family's values, that's kind of the spectrum upon which your character is judged. So how this relates to Afghan justice is that it reinforces informal justice mechanisms, and it does so because, if you see here, statutory law in Afghanistan is fairly recent. The current constitution is based on the 1964 constitution, which was based on the 1920s constitution, but there was no such thing as a constitution in Afghanistan when it was formed in 1747. So Afghanistan became a nation state in 1747, not before then. But before then, the Pashtuns existed. Right? These ethnic communities existed long before the country had specific borders, and they leveraged customary law. So they had their own set of laws to live by. And then Islam came. So if you think, centuries before, they had customary laws. In the 8th century, Islam started to emerge in Afghanistan. It took root in the 11th century, and that's when Sharia law had an influence in terms of how Afghanistan was governed. But again, all of that was preceded by customary law. So they're called Narkh in Afghanistan, and in Panjwai, which is ethnically Pashtun and socially tribal, they have their own version of a cultural code that basically is the premise for customary laws there, called Pashtunwali. And a Pashtunwali is interesting because it's divorced from Sharia law, so it existed before Islam, and it also is, it's unwritten. So this is something that's passed on by the oral tradition. People there are largely illiterate, so nothing is actually written down. And there's no book that you can reference that says, oh, hey, this is Pashtunwali, here's, you're Pashtun, here's your guidebook for life. It doesn't exist like that. But people know, and it's perpetuated through generations, they know what they should do to be good Pashtuns. And it does have, underlying Islamic principles, but among these guidelines are basically tenets and principles about how to be honorable. And those aspects of being honorable are tied to justice and arbitration of justice within communities. One of the major kind of thing that is, there's a huge disconnect between customary laws in Afghanistan and the West is that there, eye for an eye revenge is seen as that is justice. So if you throw acid in a woman's face as a man, then you can have acid dropped into your eyes as punishment. It also means that not all of it is necessarily violent. They do have, you can pay off feuds to settle them, or you exchange property, which also includes women. You often see cases where women are traded between households as a way to settle cases such as this. But it's largely, it's very different to what we would expect here. So for the people that came, for the victims and the witnesses that came for the trial, they found the American justice system and the military court-martial process in general, completely confounding. But they also saw it as something that was not particularly swift either. For them, under Pashtunwali or under the customary laws, justice would have been personal, it would have been local, and it would have been swift. So to mitigate against those differences, as Colonel Morse was saying, they used these victim witness liaisons, and they were essential in essentially explaining the differences between the two justice systems and why we can't just go and hang a murderer or shoot a murderer, why we have to go through this trial process, and why that is deemed as fair and equal in the US versus in Afghanistan. So they were essential in doing that and in securing the cooperation of the victims and the witnesses. There were challenges, cross-cultural challenges from the get-go, and Colonel Morse alluded to one already when he talked about Kamaluddin, one of the gentlemen that had walked into the house, one of the victims' houses, and had seen all the women's bodies that were charred and piled up. So the bodies were charred, they were exposed, and he essentially saw them, saw them, and walked out to find a local woman that could come in and reclothe them. So right away in his mind, it wasn't the fact that, hey, this is evidence, I shouldn't tamper with the evidence. The priority right then and there was, I'm completely dishonoring them, even in death, by walking in and seeing them naked and burned. Right? They're in a vulnerable state, irrespective of their state of life. So he went to get women that could then come in, reclothe them, and then they would be, people could go in and take the bodies out. But up until that point, nobody could see them without conferring any kind of dishonor. The other part of that, as you guys saw with the names, was that in Pashtun law, as I mentioned, honor is very important, and women are the repositories of honor. So men are responsible. In many ways, it's a very masculine, patriarchal society. So men are responsible for maintaining the virtue and the modesty of women, and thereby maintaining the honor of their household. As a result, they don't talk about the women in their households. Anything like that is considered kind of a slight to the women themselves. So when the prosecution team was asking about the names of the women, of the victim, the female victims, they were very hesitant to give that out. Or the men sometimes didn't even know the names of the females in their households because they go by nicknames, kind of, just names like Bibi or auntie or grandmother, but they would never, people out of respect don't use the actual name, so people didn't know the names. They couldn't provide a list. And also in some cases, men didn't want to talk about their wives' names because, especially to a man like Colonel Morse, a foreign man, well, why would you need to know my wife's name? I don't want to dishonor her by bringing up her name. And there was also the part, the names aside, but trying to figure out what the injuries were, what the females had, what injuries they had sustained. And some of them had sustained injuries to sensitive areas that the men did not necessarily want to discuss. And so in many respects, they would almost rather deny it rather than say that something had happened to them because it would be considered dishonorable. The other major difference was in the way the trial happened, the process of the trial. So through, in Afghanistan, through customary laws or the informal justice mechanism, people go through a jirga. And this is, a jirga is a Pashtun, it's a Pashto word, so, but the process, or shura, a council, is something that you would find in other parts of Afghanistan as well. But this is really by Pashtunwali, this is the way that you arbitrate justice in any area. So what you see here are a bunch of older Afghan men probably from the same tribe, that sit around. If there's an issue, they will discuss it then and there. So if this was the Bales case in Afghanistan, you'd see all the men sitting there. So you'd see Bales's family and his defense team sitting there. You'd see the prosecution sitting here. They sit in a circle because the process there is about equality and fairness. And it seems like, how could this even be? But part of that, the Pashtuns in Afghanistan have a segmentary tribal structure. Right? That sounds really boring, and it kind of is. But the point is that there's no hierarchy. Right? So you can have the tribal leader will maybe 20 men, it could be 120 men. But everybody will sit in a circle so that there is no hierarchy in terms of who's important. And they would essentially talk about what the victims would sit there. This would be their forum to air their grievances, hurl their insults at the perpetrator until somebody decided that, yes, this is how you sentence the person. Also, here it's, in the US, a trial, the military court-martial process took 18 months. Right? It happened 7,000 miles away from the actual scene of the crime. It cost quite a bit of money, including the money that was paid to the victims. And the ultimate result, the sentence, was life without parole, which in many respects for communities there, it was seen as really lenient. With the evidence provided against Bales, for them it was very clear. You don't get a trial, you don't get any, a prosecution team, you don't get things. I certainly don't get any mercy, right? Which the sentence seemed to be much more merciful than they had seen. In Afghanistan, that trial would have looked like this. It would have been local. It would have probably happened right in one of the villages, but very close to the actual scene of the crime. And it would have been arbitrated by the people that had been victimized by him. And moreover, the sentence would have been death. In the US, when they came here, they found it completely, even from a structural point of view, like looking at a room, it was completely different. But it related to the differences in the values that we have in the West and the values that they had in those Pashtun tribal communities. But as you can see here, this is any military courtroom or any courtroom really. But the structure is completely different. If you look here, everybody sits in a circle. It's equal. Everybody's on the ground. Here you've got a judge that presides over everything. The witnesses, you come in, to them, they saw it as a victim. You sit there, you sit in a box. You are confined by the space. Okay? For them, no one's confined here. So they saw Bales sitting there, and a lot of them commented that he's sitting there and he's dressed as a general. Right? He's wearing very much like the uniform that Colonel Morse is wearing. So they were very confused in terms of why is he getting the exact same treatment that we're getting when we've been victimized. Moreover, with the process here, what that allows, which is not allowed here, is that in the American process you can't say anything until people ask you questions, okay? And then once the questions end, you're done. You get off the witness stand and you're gone. So they found that particularly jarring as well. And as you can see in this, it's a courtroom rendition. But Haji Wazir sitting down. You've got Bales right there, so they can see each other. And then you've got the prosecutor who's leading the questioning. The witness box basically dictates their speech, okay, when they can talk. And there is no, in the Afghan system, there is no cross-examination. So what ended up happening was that when he stepped down, there was a real sense of disappointment. He kept asking, does anyone have any more questions for me? And there were no more questions. So he got off the witness stand feeling like he didn't get to say what was in his heart, that there was so much more. He wanted to speak for himself and for all the victims in his family, and he hadn't had the chance for that. But having said that, the sentencing wasn't what they wanted, but there was a palpable sense of relief when that the life without parole sentence was announced. And one of the victim witness liaisons essentially turned around and gave him a thumbs up. Which if you want to talk about, cross-cultural, talk about something that's, adapted in Afghanistan. Thumbs up used to be the equivalent of a, middle finger over there, but now, villagers from Kandahar totally understand this means good. Go ahead. So they were, sufficiently happy. One of the victims, one of the witnesses said that, he was 5% happy, which was a marked improvement from the 1%, which he had originally said. So good on them. But they understood the constraints. Right, they knew that the sentence wasn't going to be what they wanted, but they understood the constraints of the legal system here, and largely were able to bridge that cultural divide. And they also found a lot of relief and solace in the religion, that someday maybe justice wasn't served in the way that they wanted it done in the U.S., but at some point, Bales would get what he deserved, inshallah. So, all right, that's all I have for now. If you guys have any questions, we'd be happy to take them.
Questions? I have two questions, and they're not related to one another.
Sure.
The first question
I have
is
a terrible memory, so you might have to ask it twice.
Okay, I'll just ask one at a time. The first question is the gatwa. I did not understand that.
Yes, that's all right. So, so the military, particularly the Army, loves abbreviations, right? I could give that class in 10 minutes if I just use all the abbreviations I know. That was a joke, it wouldn't be that short. But we love our abbreviations. So this GATWA is basically a condensed mission statement, right? We also can't do anything without issuing orders. Someone's always telling me what to do, or I'm telling someone else what to do. So you do it the same way every time, particularly if you're an infantry soldier. Follows the same pattern, so it becomes second nature, right? So anytime I want to convey information to the soldiers who work for me, I'm going to give it in the same exact manner every single time, so the receiver always knows exactly not only what I'm saying, but then he can pass it on to someone else. So one of these abbreviations, or one of these ways to deliver information, has been abbreviated to GATWA. That's the GATWA part is just basically the first letter of each one of the sentences. The sentences are actually physically written. So at some point, someone said, here are the 5 different pieces of information that are critical every time you need to convey information quickly to someone else. So if I'm going on a quick mission, I'm not going to write it out. I'm just going to say off the top of my head where I'm going, others I'm taking with me, time I'm going to be gone, what to do if I don't come back, and actions to take if I'm hit. So the way that would work would be something like this. Hey, I'm going to Najibien. I'm taking Zafar with me. I'll be back at 5. I'll be gone an hour. If I don't come back, then I need you to go to the next objective, whatever it might be. And anytime we get hit, here's the battle plan, right? Here's the actions we will take on contact. So if someone fires at us, here's what we're going to do. So the way he gave the way he conveyed that information fit exactly in that GATWA format. So we were able to say, where someone says, well, clearly he's going out on a suicide mission. Like, this guy's lost it. He's going out and he knows he's not coming back. He's just going to go up in a big ball of fire. And we say, no, he's not. He's given the specific information that he normally does every time he goes on a mission. The fact to take care of my kids is in there, is that's simply what to do if I get hit, right? He's just giving guidance to so people know. What was the second? Was that both of them?
No, that was just one.
Okay.
So
I told you how to bet, man.
I didn't even ask the second one. So my second question is concern for the statement that he was just like a bad person, or he was just like a bad guy. So just to give background from my ideological dispositions that might make me have some tension with that, it's the belief that even with persons that may be like psychopaths, or with persons that may have like a lower capacity to empathize with other human beings, what I know is that there is still, that having those dispositions does not necessarily lead to becoming like a person who kills other people, and that there is still like certain events in people's lives that we can see that would trigger that sort of behavior. So my question is, especially since his actions are molded, or like his actions, like the murder that he engages in happens in the context of the military. He's using, he's acting as if he's going on a mission. He's probably using skills that have been taught to him, how to kill people, with his participation in the military. Is there some sort of responsibility that the military feels, especially for training people to kill other people, and if that triggers something within them that makes them start to kill unjustifiably, according to the military?
That's a semester-long class that you and I can have to answer that question, but I'm going to do my best. So first of all, you need to make sure that you, as an attorney, particularly as a trial attorney, as a prosecutor or defense, you have to separate what is admissible in court, if you're a prosecutor, what meets your elements. If you're going to get to a sentencing phase, in the military you do as civilian courts, but ours there's a clear, brighter delineation, and the sentencing phase is actually almost another mini trial. So the difference between what aggravation means meaning that you committed the crime and it was also particularly heinous because of whatever. So you murdered someone, that's bad, but you also murdered kids. That's really bad. That's aggravation. Versus mitigation and extenuation. So what you're talking about from a defense point of view, you might want to say, if we're at sentencing, so if someone has pled guilty to the offense, you might want to say, as mitigation, well, he's just using his Army training. Or as extenuation, you get a lot of stuff going on at home, and it just caused him to do these things. That has nothing to do with whether or not he committed the crime according to the rule of law. So as a prosecutor, as a defense attorney, that's what you're dealing with, right, is the law. So reasons that he did what he did, for all of you budding criminal attorneys, how many crimes require a motive to prove it? Not this one, not murder. Now, if I'm developing my theory of the case, then motive might be important. Because anytime someone hears these facts, one of the first questions you ask is like, whoa, what caused someone to do that? That's motive, right? So a longer way to answer your question is that science develops how to treat people who may or may not be have deficient or debilitated mental capacity or are acting in a mental state that's other than what is normal. That changes with science, but you still have to follow the rule of law. So I will tell you in this case, there were several experts who were involved. There were many doctors from both sides who had the opportunity to evaluate Sergeant Bales. We have something called a 706. It's our rule for court-martial 706. It's essentially a sanity board. You go sit in front of clinical psychiatrists and psychologists, answer a battery of questions. They come back with an analysis according to DSM-4 or 5 now as to what sort of diagnosis they might want to give. That becomes evidence for you, whether you're a defense attorney or whether you're a prosecutor. So I think that I think your point of view is a valuable and not one that is out of the ordinary. I don't share it. I think that in many circumstances I would. I don't in this case. And not only that, but you have to, that's mitigation, extenuation versus aggravation. So you have to consider when someone commits a crime, what may have led them to that particular point with the egregiousness of their crime. So in this case, we had 16 people who were murdered, 6 more who were injured. 18 of those 22, 17 of those 22 was a woman or a child, which leads me to one of your other points, is that soldiers aren't dumb. They are, we take, particularly the American military, we take great pains to ensure that soldiers understand rules of engagement, how they're allowed to act in wartime. You have an excellent professor here that can would be able to add to that. But this notion that, I mean, there are rules in war, as you know. The days of rolling through town and Genghis Khan in it are gone, and have been gone for a long time. So the soldiers on this particular mission were actually on a, their goal was exactly what I said, was to offer an alternative to the Taliban. That's in that stipulation of fact. That stipulation of fact in front of trial, or in front of the court, signed by Staff Sergeant Bales, says that his job there was to give the villagers something other than Taliban, or something other than the insurgents. So he was there essentially in an effort to create a peaceful environment. So walking into someone's home and murdering them is contrary to everything that you're trained as a soldier in general. It's particularly contrary to what these guys were trained for. Long answer.
Out of curiosity, what was, if any, the diagnosis that the panel of psychiatrists came up with, and was that at all part of the defense? Yeah,
I won't answer the first question because that will, I'm certain, be part of the appellate record. The reason I won't answer it is because the defense didn't present it.
Okay.
There was no experts testify. We called a few doctors to testify to injuries to the victims. So we had some folks testify as to Zardana, the girl who was shot in the head, as to her injuries. But as far as experts to comment on Sergeant Bales' state, defense didn't call any. So the government can call an expert. You don't have to. The defense doesn't have to call an expert in order to trigger my ability to call an expert. I can call one if somebody raises some sort of testimony, a lay witness or an expert witness. Defense didn't do that. I think they were very careful not to do it. So we ended up not calling any of our experts as well.
So it's unlikely that he had, because you would think having
I
served
think it's
4
very
terms,
unlikely that he suffered from anything that would have.
it's almost surprising that he didn't have PTSD
Right.
that they raised.
Sure. Now the other thing that PTSD doesn't equate to. This again, part of the first video I showed you
It doesn't
of
equate to
right,
violence.
right.
I just, you would
Same
think
with-
that they would
exactly.
say, you would think that if there were any evidence of it, they would bring it, so it's.
Right. Yeah, not raised. Sir.
So why did you take a plea?
So this is also a question that I will do my best to answer. My personal opinion, because really, one, it's Sergeant Bales still has appellate rights, although he pled guilty, so it tends to be a little bit less onerous. And it was non-capital, which makes it tremendously less onerous. In the military, you have a convening authority, so a general is in charge of any particular base. Ultimately, that general has final say for the justice process. So he can take a deal or not take a deal. He can decide to refer something to a special or a general court-martial, which limits the potential punishment. In this particular case, the defense offered to plead guilty in exchange for if we would remove possible sentence of death from the options. It was already referred capital. Referred means that the general refers it to the court. It was referred capital, so we were prepared to go forward as a capital case. I will tell you from my very personal point of view, is that at the same time we had 3 other cases, high-profile cases going on in the military. All of them were on their 4th year. I personally was concerned about the safety and availability of my victims and my witnesses. I think there are, I won't even say that. What I will say, it was very important for me personally for them to be available to testify. We have had cases where we prosecute without the victims. The Gibbs case comes to mind, the kill team cases, 5-2 cases out of Fort Lewis. No Afghans testified in that court-martial. So I think we still could have prosecuted the case. It was very important for the victims to be there. As Ms. Zafar said, in their mind, this process wasn't moving quickly enough. We were moving at light speed compared to military or the civilian justice system. To have a potential capital case from in 15 months, Sergeant Bales pled guilty. So 15 months from the date of the offense, the court accepted his plea of guilty. And then we had the sentencing hearing a few months later. About a month after I met them, the victims, they were already asking me, what's taking so long? What's taking so long? So they were amazing throughout the process. For them to stay with us the entire time, despite massive frustrations, my point of view from their end, as to how fast we were moving, types of questions we were asking them. Why, in their mind, it was, he came into my house and killed people. What more do you need to know? Why are you asking me all these other questions? So that had a lot to do with it. Being able to get to trial quickly with a guaranteed conviction. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that there was money paid to the victims, and given the mission to offer an alternative to the Taliban, I wonder if you could speak to kind of what the military has done. And, I don't know if you can give the details of what they paid, if it was just medical or community, helping the community, and what that relationship is like now.
I will speak, the information for that second question is what I got off of YouTube. About a month ago, literally, I watched a video on YouTube, and they were soldiers at VSP Balambai, so that exact Special Forces base, new Special Forces soldiers, of course, were being interviewed along with some of the tribal elders. And they had essentially established a militia. So they took a lot of the adult males from those villages and were using them as like a police force. And there was there's stability in the area. Maybe about 6 months, now it's probably longer than that, maybe about 8 months after the crime, there was a story in the news of some local villagers essentially taking up arms and chasing the Taliban out. That was in Panjwai. So there was definitely initial, and this was a testimony at court at the trial, there was absolutely initial detriment to the mission based on Sergeant Bales' actions. Ultimately, I think they were able to the truth is persuasive. Ultimately, I think they realized that this was one guy who was doing something completely contrary to his training in the mission, and we understand that he was a criminal, not that the American forces were trying to do this. The money part I won't comment. I actually wasn't part of it. They were paid both for their deceased and also for the victims. As far as medical care, the 5 of those victims from Ali Kozai were treated first at Fabzangaban, given emergency treatment. They were all flown subsequently to Kandahar Airfield and spent anywhere from a week to, I think one of them there was about 3 weeks getting follow-on treatment. And then Zardana, again, the girl who was shot in the head, we flew her to Naval Hospital in San Diego. She spent about 6 weeks there getting therapy and rehab before she was sent back to Kandahar. Sure.
Was there any background stories of the motivation for his action? You say he was going to kill military-age males. I mean, had he had a bad experience?
Yeah, so I'll tell you again, this is the same, this was entered into that stipulation of fact. So in a military court, frequently as the prosecutor, and I've been both a defense attorney and a prosecutor, if you want a guilty plea, as a prosecutor, if a defense attorney comes to me and says, hey, give me a deal, my guy will plead guilty but cap his sentence at X months or X years. As a prosecutor, I'll say, all right, I'll do it, but you have to enter into a stipulation of fact. So it's a written agreement between the prosecution and the defense. Specifically, the accused or the defendant signs it. That goes in front of the judge. He uses that not only to ensure that the soldier is guilty and understands he's guilty, but we can use that for sentencing as well. So everything I'm about to tell you is in that stipulation of fact. It was about 37 pages in this case. Sergeant Bales was suffering some, he had some significant financial issues. 2 of his homes were undervalued at the time. One of them he had already foreclosed on, and the other one was I think was pending foreclosure. He was not satisfied with his home life. He frequently made disparaging comments about his spouse and his family in front of other soldiers, to include junior soldiers, which is incredibly inappropriate in the military, in any circumstance, but absolutely in the military. That was in the stipulation of fact. He was concerned that he was not going to get picked up for promotion to the next rank. He thought that the Army didn't appreciate his contributions as much as that he thought they should. He believed that this Special Forces group was not being aggressive enough. So this Special Forces group was about shaking hands and providing an alternative to the Taliban. The prior one was not quite as much. Sergeant Bales believed that that second group should have been acting more aggressively. There was an IED, an improvised explosive device that caused a Navy ordnance disposal tech to lose half of his leg about a week before this happened. Sergeant Bales was not on that mission, and he wasn't on the recovery mission, and he was really just acquaintances with the soldier or the sailor that lost his leg. But Sergeant Bales believed that the unit should have been taking more aggressive action to respond to that. All of that together, essentially the stipulation of fact was basically the argument I made at trial based on the stipulation of fact was that this is a guy who thought that he deserved a lot more than what he was given. So he decided to take action. Those are actually Sergeant Bales' words. I decided to take action. So that essentially was the theory of the case.
I had a question about the cultural aspect of it, so I had a
Sure.
review. Because you're talking about questioning, right, and having a cultural consultant and obviously translators, which are just the language, but you have somebody who's looking into the traditions and the conflicts and how you do the investigation, but also how you question them.
Yeah.
Is there any allowances made in a trial that is usually very highly ritualized and controlled, where you know that the testimony and the witnesses are very important? Is there any allowance to give them more time to speak or to break out of the ritual that is usually?
You're going to be, I'll talk because that's military court-martial rules. So you are, as you guys are about to find out, you're at the mercy of your judge, right? There should be the standard set of rules that everybody applies equally, but somehow they seem to all sort of interpret it differently. So you're kind of reliant on your judge based on if he's going to allow you to ask open-ended questions or leading questions, if he's going to allow a victim to answer in the narrative, how much leeway he wants to give you. I think that I was very cognizant of what this trial would have been like had it happened in Afghanistan. Ms. Zafar, frankly, was very concerned that they were going to go in there and throw a shoe at the absolute, that was the least of her worries, that somebody was going to throw a shoe. I was more confident, and they delivered. They were all great. They were all fantastic. But we were concerned that he was going to do something, any of them that were going to do something to disrupt the integrity of the courtroom. My discussions with them, again, a lot of this had to do with just normal human interaction with these guys, was that eventually it boiled down to this. If I was in your country, and if this was in your court or your JAGC, I would behave according to your rules. So what I'm asking you right now is you need to behave according to my rules. You need to not dishonor my courtroom. And they follow through with
Also,
it.
though, is there any kind of respect for?
They were given a translator. No, they were given a translator whose job is to translate directly, right? Not, he said, literally as if he or she is speaking what the victim said. We had each side, defense and the government, had a translator sitting next to us. That if the witness said something that I thought was going to be objectionable and create an appellate issue for me, I told him, smack me, so I can stand up and object. And then we can excuse the panel and decide either let him say what he wants to say or figure out what it was he was going to say and then ask him, either I ask my question a different way or ask him to answer it a different way. So as far as letting him yell at Sergeant Bales for a few minutes, that wasn't going to happen. That's partly for the court rules, and that was also as a prosecutor, you want to protect the record. You want to make sure that I don't have any appellate issues because I don't want to do this again. So I think we were, I was especially cognizant of making sure that we followed the rules. The slide that Ms. Zafar had up there was an absolute heartbreaking moment of the trial because Haji Wazir is the one who lost 11 family members, 6 of the 7 children. He was very understandably very angry. His point was, he brought me here 7,000 miles. It's my turn to talk. So I had told him, here's how it works. I'll ask you questions. You only answer the questions I ask you. When I'm done with you, the defense is going to ask you questions. You only answer the question they ask you. At some point, the judge might have some questions and the jury might have some questions. You answer only the questions they ask you. So he said, I got it. Major Stell was directed Haji Wazir. He finished with him. Defense said no questions. Judge said no questions. Panel had no questions. Judge said, thank you for your time. You're free to go. And he looked around and just sat there and said, does anyone have any more questions for me? He knew he did what I asked him to do. It was crushing to sit there and just have this silence in the courtroom where no one had any questions for him. And he said before he looked at the panel, he said, does anyone have any questions for me? I want to tell you what's in my heart. And finally, I mean, I think I got up finally and was just like, come on, let's go. It was, emotionally it was crushing, but I also didn't want him to, stand up and start yelling because then we had a problem. So long answer, short answer is no. No exception.
And the judge too is, it's funny because I think what's interesting about this case is that it brought out those things that people don't necessarily think about, these cross-cultural issues, the linguistic issues. And I think, at first, initially when I saw the judge and the palpable frustration where he's like, just get off the witness stand. Whereas for him, it's like, if I get off, it's not just me that wants to say this, it's all the dead people that I've brought, all the baggage that I've brought with me here that needs to be aired. But there was no understanding of that, I think, from the judge's side. So I think, if anything, I think this case set a pretty good example of why these things need to be considered in the future in terms of how the actual trial is conducted.
We were able to talk to him. I talked to him afterwards and said, one, I said, listen, I mentioned every single one of your family members by name. I told the jury about every one of your family members. We had one of the victim witness liaison was in the court when I was arguing the sentence. And then he came in afterwards and he basically said, I got this. And then he talked to them very emotionally about essentially that I had said what they wanted to say better than any of them would have said it because of the cultural differences, right? He said the panel understands what he's saying. The panel understands the military. The panel understands his language. The panel understands the process. He did it better than you could have done. Ultimately, not until that sentence was read did I realize how much anxiety it had built up. And it literally, a couple of them cried in the front row. To have a Pashtun male cry.
It's just such a masculine
Yeah.
society.
And then when I went back in a room probably about this size where they were waiting for the sentence, before the sentence was read, I went in to talk to them. They were very upset. That's when Mullah Braun was 1% satisfied of the process. We came back in after the sentence was read, and they were just relieved and noticeable. I mean, the air had gone out of the room, and that's when Mullah Brown, who has a great sense of humor, that's when he said, "I'm 5% satisfied." So, anything else? Sorry.
How concerned were you with after Haditha, the system kind of seemed like it failed
Yeah.
with a similar massacre? Was there any concern there that a similar kind of thing would take place here? Was there a strategy to?
Yeah, absolutely. That was largely why I wrote down those 3 goals, and part of it was I wanted them there. I wanted this to make sure that it was as transparent as possible, that the victims were there and had a voice. I wanted, from a tactical point of view, from the prosecution point of view, in the military, the defense is reliant on the government, not necessarily on me personally, but on the big government to pay for whatever experts they want. So as a prosecutor, you can deny a request. You can say, no, I'm not giving you that guy. I'm giving you a suitable alternative. Or you can say, you don't need that guy, and you haven't proven that you need that guy. If you want it, ask the judge. The judge can order it. In this case, my position was we're granting everything. Anything they want, we are giving it to them. Because I don't want this to be, we're gonna have our foot on the gas the entire time, and we're not taking it off until he says, until I hear it guilty. Then we will back off a little bit. So that was not Haditha specifically, but I think the importance of the case and what it meant, we were all very cognizant of.
You're referring to that, because Haditha, they couldn't bring the Iraqis over to testify, and those were big failings.
Right. And again, we had in the Army, we've had other cases where we did not bring back witnesses or victims, and we're still able to get guilty verdicts. But it was important to all of us that the victims have a voice, their own voice.